Welcome everyone to another video of Vinyl Addict. This is Chili and I have the new Smashing Pumpkins album, Autumn, and I'm gonna go through this and give you guys my thoughts on this. Before I get into this though, please don't forget to hit the like button, comment on this video, share this video, and if you still haven't, please subscribe to my channel and hit the notification bell for updates. Okay, so with that out of the way, Autumn is the rock opera in 3 acts by the Smashing Pumpkins. First of all, let's go through this whole thing. It's a double. The packaging is a double gatefold, kind of put together here in the spine, and there's each member. You got Billy Corgan there, and I believe that's Jeff Schroeder. And of course Chamberlain and James Iha. Okay, now they didn't really put a lot of things in here. They only put this little flap here, which is sad. I was expecting a bit more, but I guess there is a limited edition box set that has, it's numbered up to 1333 copies, 1,333 copies, and there's actually 10 more additional tracks on that in the form of 5 7-inch singles. If you're not completely satisfied with this and you want more Pumpkins, then you could try to get that edition, the black box set of Autumn. Now, this was apparently, when I first heard about this, what Billy Corgan was talking about, that it was going to be a sequel to Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness. Now, that to me is, the rock operas of all rock operas, and he even called it Generation X's The Wall. And, so putting this new album, Autumn, as a sequel is kind of putting the bar up really high. I felt like some of their last albums were kind of hit and miss. My last album that I really enjoyed from the Smashing Pumpkins was the Oceana album. And then after that, they had the Moment of an Elegy with Tommy Lee on drums. And, there's some of the albums weren't as great as some of the earlier ones, I thought Oceana was great. However, this one was, he's kind of putting this up there, that this is a sequel to that album. And then turns out it's supposedly also part of a trilogy, because then there's Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness, and it's tying together with Machina from the year 2000, and then Autumn. And it's weird because even Machina has like a part 1 or a part 2 in it, and he's always kind of starting off all these kind of trilogies or these kinds of concepts and whatnot. However, this one I felt was actually really good, and if I have to compare this to Melancholy, I think this one works as far as like being more like The Wall than say that album. And I'll go through it with you right now. I pretty much heard all of these songs only in this format. I have not heard Act 1 or Act 2 prior to this vinyl release. Okay, so I didn't go online and listen to these songs and listen to it that way. I'm hearing it all just like when Melancholy came out. I heard that whole thing in its entirety, and that's how I heard this album, even though Act 1, Act 2, and Act 3 are separate albums apparently, as a trilogy in itself in here. Listening to it the way that I listen to it is and I think most people who've heard it individually and waited for the conclusion and this and that, maybe they have a different perspective on it than how I listen to it. So when I listen to Act 1, so you're starting off with Autumn, which is the theme song, and compared to the theme song from melancholy, the simple piano piece prior to Tonight Tonight. This one kind of has a sci-fi Clockwork Orange kind of feel to it, and Mike Garson, the avant-garde pianist plays on it, who I love a lot of his work, from David Bowie, of course. He's played on the last Duran Duran album, so he was on the first track, and that was really cool. There's a jet going through the sky. Okay, so coming after that theme song, the reason why I think this works better than Melancholy, or pretty much more like The Wall, what he was talking about as far as a concept rock opera. The characters on here, they're introduced in Act 1. So with different characters and the point of view of them, each one of these characters singing a song like Butterfly Suite is from the point of view of June, who's a character in this story. And with different personalities and different characters, you get a variety of different songs. I felt that Melancholy didn't have that. It had a lot more guitar driven, kind of shoegaze kind of stuff, psychedelic, kind of long, epic songs. And then they had a few kind of psychedelic, kind of electronic kind of things popping up here and there, like 1979 or Love or Beautiful, but the majority of stuff was just pretty much guitar driven rock and kind of psychedelic, Porcelina, long epic songs. This is really, there's a lot of songs on here that are just less than 5 minutes. I mean, I think predominantly most of them are. And there's a lot of characters on here, and a lot of their point of views are singing individual pieces on here. And that's what brings out all these different kinds of variety in the music, which is great. And that's what Act 1 is. They introduce the characters. Act 2 is that they put them through a situation. And Act 3, of course, they get these characters out of this situation, typical, drama or story, right? And the first act, I mean, there's some great songs on here, and if you really, for me, love that album Adore, I was told that this would be an album for you. And because there was a lot of electronic kind of music, and the Pumpkins were really in that album going that direction, and they kind of revisit it in here. Some may call some of this stuff like dance music, electronic kind of music, but there's also a feel of 80s new wave music included in Atum. Now, the song Good and Goodbye is probably the only song that's kind of reminiscent of old 90s Pumpkins. And it has a wah-wah solo, it has Jimmy Chamberlain's kind of timbali kind of sound on his drums. And it kind of sounds that 90s kind of Pumpkins. The wah-wah pedal was very 90s. I mean, it was on Alive by Pearl Jam, it was on what was that, Man in the Box, by Alice in Chains. Those Seattle bands were using it. Fell on Black Days, there was a wah-wah solo, and Mudhoney was just wah-wah, right? Metallica, they still use wah-wah, but there's only like a couple of songs, and this song, he really kind of goes back there and kind of throws on that wah-wah solo. However, there's that electronic stuff like What a Do, I Do, which is sort of like a dark kind of 1979 vibe. Hooray, I think that is the song Ruby. This character named Ruby is apparently singing, and it's sort of like a cabaret kind of with an electro vibe on it. And the Gold Mask, that is sort of the new wave 80s kind of vibe going on there. I kind of really, it made me think of in excess, don't change. It had that kind of feel to it. You know, the melody, the vocal melody and everything. And so it had that kind of vibe for me, which is cool. You know, that's like early 80s kind of stuff. And so that's introducing all these characters with all the different kinds of variety of songs. Now, Act 2, okay, so you're going through a lot more darker themes, I guess, on here. And Empire, there's a lot of rocking songs on here. Empires is great. But how it starts off is Avalanche. And that kind of reminded me of that whole Pink Floyd Wall kind of thing. Because it starts off with this little girl singing, I hope someday we'll find out what happiness means, right? And it reminded me of Goodbye Blue Sky, how this little kid is talking in the beginning of the song too, and there's like birds chirping and everything, and look mom, there's no airplane up in the sky, and it was that same kind of innocence kind of thing, and then, you know, here comes darkness, right? And so he kind of did the same thing. It reminded me of that with the little girl saying what she says, and then you could hear the outside birds chirping and everything. And so everything is really cool, right? It's a foreboding kind of, there's something sinister that's happening, right? And, you know, he also kind of mentioned 2112 as as part of this kind of story concept, you know, because there's in this story, I guess it's Shiny, who's the exiled rock star, is coming back. They didn't like what he had to say in his music, sort of just like in 2112, with, you know, that whole side one, and you know, with the guitar being found and everything, and you know, it challenges the government, right? And so here you start having songs like Empires, which I mentioned earlier, and it had like this cool kind of riff that is kind of reminiscent to Driven by Russia's Alex Lifeson, you know. And so I have to say one thing though, the riffs that he is using on here are fucking great, you know, and the way the guitar sounds, Beguiled, that is very Metallica, you know. It sounded like he took that riff, Eye of the Beholder, from the Justice album, and it's sort of like dance metal, you know what I mean? It's just how he's putting all these kind of rhythms and all these kinds of genres and mixing them up and playing with them. It's really cool. And Springtimes, which is this kind of dark acoustic thing at the end, it kind of closes Act 2 just like it closed, how Pink Floyd closed The Wall on Act 1 or Act 2 with Goodbye Cruel World, right? And so, which brings you to Act 3. And Act 3 is, that I think that's why people bought this, because they got to hear what's going to happen next. And I think that's when they bring in the kind of the prog side of Smashing Pumpkins. Songs that I really like on here is That Which Animates the Spirit. He kind of starts talking about Zero, so that's kind of harping back to, you know, the character from that album from Melancholy. The Lure of Failure is great. Harmageddon, that is just a rockin' riff right there. Yeah, it's, you know, the tone on here is very crisp, very, you know, it's metal, you know, sounding. It's not shoegazy kind of that sound that he was kind of doing on Melancholy, and even on Siamese Dream. He was, you know, Alan Moulder, I believe, was producing those, and they had helping out with engineering on that, because there's a lot of shoegaze kind of thing that they were into at the time. This is just pretty much him just playing metal riffs. I mean, it's really cool, and the drums are really great. Now, Intergalactic is another song I like from Act 3. That reminds me of The Cure, early Cure. I'm talking Hanging Garden, just tribal drums, and it just brings you to that time, And that's one thing that Billy Corgan is such a master of his influences, and he just kind of uses it at his disposal, but makes it his own. He makes it his own, and his voice on here is great. It's never sounded better, and which leaves you down to side D, which is the story of Atum, right? And it's just a narration. It's sort of just like if you ever heard the Dio album Magica, that was the same kind of concept thing, but instead of hiring all these people and a cast to recite your story and narrate the story, Dio did it himself. So that's what side D is on the last fourth LP. Is just you get to hear the story of all these characters and the plot pretty much up until just Act 1. And my final thoughts on this, it was just like it's to me this worked more as an opera. This is, I think, sounding more like The Wall. It reminded me more of The Wall because the songs were short. They weren't just long jams, and it really moved the story along and moved the characters along, and if you followed it, and it made more sense, and the songs in itself, I mean, from Act 1, then going on to Act 2, because I only could tell you how I listened to this. I did not listen to this separately, just by, waiting for the next act to come out. I just heard them all in one, like I said, continuous sit down and listen. And maybe I would have had a different or a change of heart had I just listened to Act 1 all the time when it was released in 2022, and then in January 2023 listen to Act 2, and then listen to Act 3 when it came out in May. No, maybe I would have a different take on it, but just listening to this, I just remember this was an easy listen actually than Melancholy. I remember Melancholy just being like, wow, this is way too much to take in. But since these songs were so short and he cut out the fat on all this stuff, and this just gave you great moments, great songs, it kept me more interested. I have to admit that Melancholy was quite an endurance to sit down and listen to in your first time listening to it, to listen to that whole thing. I couldn't. I had to listen to one disc at first and just like, okay, then kind of continue for this for some reason, and after listening to the Act 1, which is like 40 minutes, they're really short. Act 2 was like 43 minutes, but Act 3 was probably the longest one on here, but by the time I was just so, revved up listening to the first two, I just wanted to continue it, and it was just like, I was blown away, So this is a rock opera in 3 acts, and it's, I think it's in the tradition of Tommy, The Wall, and I would say this one really works well. And whoever is going to come up and try to, beat this, I mean, I guess this would be somewhat like of a nowadays standard as far as rock operas are concerned. This is something that is kind of setting the bar now. I feel this is how I'm really kind of psyched about this album. This is like I was kind of blown away from it. I didn't think that he still had this in him. just by listening to his last few albums, yeah, he really came back hard with this. So that is my review on Atum by the Smashing Pumpkins, a rock opera in 3 acts. Now tell me what your thoughts are on this album. Am I just deaf and is this garbage? or you still think Melancholy is, I mean, I'm not saying this is better than Melancholy. I'm just saying that this is as good and great as Melancholy. And, he did deliver, I feel. If you don't feel like he delivered, please leave me a comment below. And I like to hear what people think about this, especially Smashing Pumpkin fans. I mean, I have their albums. I have all their albums. But I never really considered myself a really big fan. I just really love his music, and I'll still get what he puts out. However, it's just I just felt like, even like I said, this last few albums, hasn't really grabbed me and enough to really go, wow, he's a genius, and everything he does is great. No, I mean, some of it, I think it really, I really think it has to do with who he puts on his album, I mean, Tommy Lee, I didn't think it really worked well with him, actually, as a drummer. I think there is a connection with Chamberlain and Corgan that is unstoppable, and there's a chemistry there that's just, it works, because even these different directions that he's going to, Chamberlain is right there, and he knows, they're like, kinetically connected, musically and everything. I mean, they're both Rush heads, right? They were both in the Rush documentary film, and so they kind of have a connection on a lot of things, especially when music is concerned. And so if Tommy Lee was on here, no, I don't think it would sound like this. So that's my argument. So leave me a comment below, and with that, I'll shut up, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Bye.